I'd like to call this meeting of the Legislative and Legal Affairs Committee to order. The time is 5:30 p.m. We have one item on our agenda. It is item number 25-1009414, communication from City Solicitor Jason Grossfield regarding procedure to fill vacant Ward 7 councillor position. And so this item has been referred to our committee. I'd like to read the letter from the solicitor. Dear Honorable President Ossing and councilors, as requested, I write to advise regarding the procedure to fill the vacant position of Ward 7 councillor following the recent passing of Councillor Donald R. Lander Sr. State law governs the procedure to fill a city council position which becomes vacant during a term. The procedure varies depending upon whether the vacancy occurs in relation to the term and whether the position is an at-large or ward councillor. With respect to the current ward councillor vacancy, in my opinion, state law requires that the City Council forthwith order an election to fill the vacancy for the remainder of the unexpired term. If a change to this procedure is desired, the city may seek special legislation to otherwise address the vacant position, and enclosed is a copy of past special legislation enacted in 2003 and 1995. So in 1995 and 2003, similar situations had arisen, and so going to just jump ahead to, based on historical research provided by City Clerk Stephen Carrigan, the city obtained special legislation to appoint an individual rather than hold an election for the unexpired term to fill a ward city councillor vacancy before the last 6 months of the term of office in the two prior instances in which such a vacancy occurred since 1995. In May of 2003, Chapter 16 of the Acts of 2003 provided that the City Council may appoint a person by a majority vote of the City Council to fill the current vacancy in the office of Ward 7 Councillor. In July of 1995, Section 2 of Chapter 83 of the Acts of 1995 provided that the mayor is hereby authorized to appoint a specifically named individual to fill the unexpired term of Councillor of Ward 3. A municipality may seek special legislation to affect only the municipality in accordance with Section 8(1) of the Home Rule Amendment in the Massachusetts Constitution. Local approval by the mayor and city council of a home rule petition to seek special legislation is required. A home rule petition requests the adoption of legislation by the general court for a purpose and option. It often includes draft legislation. Should the city council wish to seek to obtain special legislation, this office can assist in the drafting of a home rule petition. Respectfully, Jason Grossfield, City Solicitor. So I would like to, at this time, invite our City Solicitor and our City Clerk up to the well. Both for attending the meeting tonight, and I'd like to start off by inviting, I'm going to start with the clerk, Mr. Carrigan, because he is our elections guru in the city. So please, Mr. Carrigan, let us know your thoughts about the situation.
Sure. Well, as the city solicitor pointed out in his letter, this has occurred twice in the city's history, not where the death of a councillor has occurred with more than 6 months left in the term. In 1995, Ward 3 Councillor Robert Ledoux passed away, and in 2003, Ward 7 Councillor Natalie Lashman passed away, and they both had just about 6 months left in their term, a little bit more than 6 months left in their term. In both instances, the City Council decided to seek a home rule petition to appoint someone. In 1995, they wrote the legislation because they appointed Mr. Ledoux's widow, Joan Ledoux, to fulfill the remainder of his term. And she, at the time, was also a teacher here in the city of Marlborough. So they had to, get special legislation to do that. And she was willing to serve, and she just wanted to serve out the rest of his term, and then she was not going to seek re-election. In 2003, when Councillor Toll passed away, I'm told that a similar situation happened, that her husband, Richard Toll, was interested in being appointed to the seat, but then for whatever reason, Mr. Toll decided to take out nomination papers, and the council had not yet obtained the special act to give them the authority to appoint. So rather than appoint someone, they waited until the election was over in November. And then they immediately appointed the winner of that election. It happened to be Richard Toll, and coincidentally, it was Mr. Toll and Councilor Landers who actually were running that year. So they didn't want to give anyone an unfair advantage by appointing someone a little bit earlier. I'm of the opinion, I do, and I have prepared election calendars. If the council so chooses to call for an election, you can, I do have them, and I'm very happy to share them with you, if, so you can see. The earliest election date that would be possible for a special election would be, let me make sure I say this correctly, a special preliminary election would be, if necessary, July 1st, with a special election for Ward 7 on July 29th. That's one option. The second option, there are really two, you can go further and further out, but these two are the closest dates that we can come up with. If another option would be a special preliminary on July 15th and a special municipal on August 12th. So those would be the dates, and then all the other dates kind of simply fall into what's happening. The sooner the election gets called, the less time people are going to have to gather signatures and things like that. So that will be a factor. But the thing that I'm most concerned with, I should say, and is the regular municipal election will be taking place, and the election calendar will be coming out for the regular municipal election, and some of the dates they'll be coincidental. And someone could win the special preliminary election. They would serve as the councillor at the very earliest would be at the August meeting. Based on both calendars, that would be really the first meeting they could be sworn in. Perhaps the July meeting if the other one, no. But they wouldn't serve a very long time, and they could actually have an opponent in the regular, because they're only would be filling the remainder of the term this year. It's not going to, they're going to have to run two elections basically simultaneously if they choose to run for the full 2-year term. City of Boston, if I can digress for a minute, is facing this very similar situation. They have a city councilor that is, well, not similar situation. The councilor didn't die. This particular one is under federal indictment. So it's a little different, but they are scheduled to resign, or they indicated they are going to resign. And the Boston City Charter is much more strict than ours. It says that if a vacancy occurs within 180 days, they have to call for a special election. And they have the City Council just recently passed a petition stating that they want to forego the election. Secretary of State is in support of that because he thinks that running elections like this, that close, it's going to cause some voter confusion and could cause some people to not understand what's happening. I can't speak to it, but from what I understand, the citizens and residents of Ward 7 have not been underserved in this with Councilor Landers since his passing. The other councilors have been here and have been, I think, doing a fine job. I don't think, there are maybe some other procedural things that could happen with the council because now there's only 10 votes instead of 11 votes, special permit, but that's not anything that the city needs to concern itself with. That would be a petitioner or an applicant who is applying for something. It's going to have to read the room and determine if they want to really try for something, and knowing that they, if they need 8 votes and there's only 10 votes in the room. So that's where I stand. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have or take it from there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I'm just going to check in with the solicitor and see what you'd like to add, if anything.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So as I mentioned in the letter, the charter that we have has been in place, as you know, for some amount of time. And the charter provision, which predates, 2003 and 1995, sets a certain period where if there's a vacancy in a ward councilor position, that requires calling an election. Of course, as you see from the history, and it's not unique to Marlborough and it's come up in other communities as well, is that communities from time to time will seek special legislation, which is the legislature passing a law, the governor signing a bill, to essentially exempt themselves from whatever the particular charter requirement is. And that can vary depending on the circumstances. So from a legal perspective, what you'll find in looking at communities across the Commonwealth who have unfortunately come up against similar vacancies is a special election is called, in accordance with the charter, or legislation is sought, in the form of a home rule petition. And then it really is a matter of expediting the legislative process at the state level to try to get legislation passed as soon as possible, to either get the authority for the city council to appoint someone to fill that position by a majority vote is, what kind of many examples look like. There was another example a few years back in Brockton where the community didn't want to hold an election and didn't want to appoint anybody and sought and obtained special legislation to that effect. So the approaches can vary, but that's kind of the legal landscape, and I'm also happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Solicitor. I'd like to open it up to the members of the committee first, and then I'll open it to the other members. Councilor Roby.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess for me, I understand that there probably at least I haven't received phone calls from anybody in the ward saying that they feel like they're not being represented. I also haven't received a call from any of them asking for help on anything. I don't know if anybody else in the council has, if things are okay in Ward 7, and so there isn't that need to call. But I do feel like we have a responsibility to them, as our charter says, to fill the position. What I would be opposed to, and I hope all of us that are here and those that aren't watched the videos that were provided by Councillor Ossing through the work with the cable station to get those recordings so that we could watch them. I'll use the word fiasco because I really feel that's what it was. They went from a vote on April 7th, 9-1, with our own current Councillor Ossing sitting in those seats back then, to do the home rule petition that then in August they decided to not appoint anybody, but to just let the regular election in November happen, and then they appointed that person to hold the seat immediately. And if you listen to those recordings, you will hear the tone that there was an obvious issue at that council with the 10 members and 5-5 votes. And so they felt the need to have somebody, but not until after the election, and only because they felt that they needed somebody to be there to represent the ward when they set the tax rate, which is just mind-boggling to me. You're elected in November, and in 30 days they expect you to sit in a seat and vote on a tax rate. So to me, we either do one of two things. We decide to hold a special election with the dates that Steve has given us, preferably the earlier one, or we don't do anything, and a new person will take the seat in January of next year. Because to me, the election in November is not to fill the seat. The election in November is to have someone take the seat in January, just like everybody else that's being elected. So I would push for having an election. I understand the points that the city clerk made, that yes, people would be potentially having to deal with 2 elections, but I think they would deal with the first one first. They would have to pull papers. Then that would be done. If they decide they want to run for the seat again, they'd have to then deal with those dates, and I don't really see the conflict. I think my understanding of the Secretary of State in Boston is that Boston does not have their act together when it comes to elections, and he did not want them to hold a special election because he felt that they would mess that one up as much as they've messed up other elections. And I don't think we're in that same position. So I don't think that just because the Secretary of State says, oh, I'm okay with Boston not doing it, that would be a reason we would say we wouldn't do it. So that's my stand. I'll wait till everybody's done before.
Thank you, Councilor Roby. I do have a question based off of something that Councilor Roby had mentioned, because it was one of the things I was wondering. Are there any councilors in the room who have received any outreach from residents of Ward 7 or any constituents wondering about the Ward 7 vacancy? Councilor Ossing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've got 3 phone calls. One, a constituent not from Ward 7 that said don't run the election because they don't want to see the unanticipated costs of running an election. So it was more from a fiscal standpoint. I did get a call from an individual from Ward 7 who was potentially considering to run if there was going to be an election. And I got a third one from an individual that gave me no name or address, so I didn't know how to get back to them. As far as constituent calls, I've only dealt with one call from a constituent from Ward 7, and that's only because they knew me and it wasn't a Ward 7 issue. But I haven't had any Ward 7 specific issues brought to my attention. I'm happy to deal with them if we have. I've checked with the council secretary, and she has not received any calls or concerns from anyone from Ward 7 feeling that their items aren't being addressed in any fashion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Fricillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions and then a couple of comments, so bear with me for a moment. But my first question would be, say we were to go the route of a special election, will people be able to pull nomination papers immediately, and then what would the deadline be going up? Because I know we usually have a hard deadline before the election.
You do. We will.
Right,
And,
we will.
Papers will be available if the earliest the council can vote, obviously, to call the election would be at your meeting on April 28th.
Sure.
If you vote to call a special election, whatever date you pick, papers will be available immediately. On April 29th, we'll have nomination papers available in the office, and people can come in and pick them up. It's pretty simple. I mean, we actually are in control of that. As far as hard deadlines, yes, for an election, for the July 29th special election, and that's the only one, I'm going to just use the election date, not the preliminary, because we don't know if we need a preliminary. For the all the dates are, again, driven off of that. So for the July 29th preliminary election, papers would be available on April 29th, and then the last day to obtain nomination papers would be on May 9th. So, I mean, people would roughly have about 9 or 10 days, business days, to pick up paper. I think it's 9 days, because Tuesday through Friday, then Monday through the following Friday, May 9th. If you were to push the election out to the second date I mentioned, which is August 12th, again, papers would be available on April 29th. People would then have until May 22nd to draw nomination papers, so they'd have almost a full month to get the papers. When I say the last day to obtain nomination papers, that's May 9th. For example, again, going back to the July 29th date, they have to be filed with the registrars for certification by May 13th. So you could get them on that Friday, and by Tuesday you would have to file them with the registrars. Everybody has to file them no later than Tuesday, May 13th, in order to get them certified, make sure you have the requisite 50 signatures, and then go forward from there, then all the other dates.
You answered my next question. I was going to ask if it's still the 50 signature threshold for
yes.
this. Okay.
I mean, that's what's required, is just 50, in and of the ward only, though. You'd have to get 50 signatures from within the ward, yes.
Okay. My next question is just regarding cost of a potential special election. I don't know if you have an itemized idea.
I've roughed out some costs. I mean, it's going to be approximately about $5,000 per election.
Okay.
Again, and that's based on about 1,500 ballots. And I say 1,500 ballots, I mean, hopefully the Secretary's office is not viewing this, because they would get very mad at me, because we are technically supposed to buy 3 ballots for every registered voter in the ward, and there's roughly about 3,500 voters, but I typically do not do that for municipal elections, only because I base it on historical, okay, we're going to have this much of a turnout, we're going to have a 10% turnout. I will say, though, we already do have about 400 requests for vote by mail ballots, because not anticipating a vacancy in the Ward 7 seat. With the municipal street listing, I included with that anybody who would like to request a ballot for all elections. You could tick off all elections or just the general election, your municipal general or whatever, and everybody returned them and checked off all elections. So should you call for a special election, the voters of Ward 7 would be entitled to receive a ballot by mail. And we have about 400 of those already. So we're looking at about $5,000 per election, give or take.
Okay.
I mean, just for the specific ward.
No, it's good to know. I appreciate that. Aside from that, I don't think I have any further questions. My biggest concern with going forward with an appointment is I fear that we could give an incumbency advantage to whoever we pick. I don't know if there's a legal way to bind somebody to not run for that election. I don't think so, to my knowledge. But I fear that we appoint someone. I mean, this is happening in Ohio right now. Governor DeWine appointed his lieutenant governor to their vacant Senate seat after Vice President Vance took office. And this gentleman is going to run for election, right? He's giving an unfair advantage over other candidates in the field. So I worry that if we were to appoint somebody, we would have to be very careful as to whom it is that we do pick, or maybe go with an option where we leave it vacant intentionally as to not give that kind of advantage to somebody. So that's my biggest reservation about asking for a home rule petition and doing that. So I think I share with Councilor Roby that I'm leaning more towards a special election, really for that main reason. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, can I just get a clarification from the clerk? You said 5,000 per election, so you're saying 5,000 for the preliminary and then 5 again for
Correct.
the regular?
Yeah.
And if there is no preliminary, then...
And it would be roughly about $5,000.
Okay, but you would still have the cost of mailing, or you would know there would be
I would
no
not have to mail the
preliminary, so you
ballot
wouldn't
for
have
the
to mail
preliminary election.
ballots.
The only way we would have a preliminary election is if more than double the number run. So in the ward case, if 3 candidates come out, we have to have a preliminary election to eliminate 1 candidate, and then the top 2 move on. If only 1 candidate comes out and decides to run, that person will automatically go right to November. We still have to hold an election, even though there's only 1 person on the ballot. We will still have to hold the election, but yes, it'd be about $5,000 per election, the preliminary, and then again for the general election.
Okay, thank you.
That excludes other costs, like staff time and things like that. So, but staff in my office, but it's kind of built into their salaries right now. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. All set?
Yes.
Okay. Councilor Vital had had his hand up before, and then I can jump to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If the council decides on leaving the status quo, not doing anything, and this is more directed towards the solicitor, what type of special legislation because it's never been done before, right? And both of the previous examples given, there was an election, and there was a temporary person that took the position. If we do nothing, what do we as a council need to, or as a solicitor, do you need to do in order for that to take place?
So through the chair, we would want to do a home rule petition to address the fact that we're not going to hold a special election and we're not going to appoint somebody. And that's kind of what Brockton ended up doing a few years ago, where they basically got legislation passed to say, hey, despite what our charter says, for this vacancy at this particular time, we're not obligated to hold a special election. That's what that looks like, because otherwise, right, there's this obligation under the current charter to, forthwith call the election. So that would be one way that could be addressed.
I know it's not normally your position, but what would you suggest?
So I think there's no one correct answer to it, right? In terms of, not to give you a lawyer's answer, but there are, that's kind of what I'm about to give you, unfortunately.
I'll give you the city clerk answer after.
In that, right, sitting here today, we have a charter on the books that says do X, right? And that's the legal answer is that's the requirement unless and until it's changed. And the practical answer is there are plenty of examples of it being changed. Here in Marlborough, we've got 2, very, in the relatively short term. And then in other communities, there's examples as well. So there's no one correct answer. That's the legal answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Doucette?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I do have a couple of questions. First to Steve, which one would you choose?
I would choose not to hold an election. And it's not based on anything work-wise, I mean, my office can obviously handle it if the council so chooses. But I personally think that it's going to cause some confusion, just because I know Councilor Roby, when the regular municipal calendar comes out, which will be, I've been keeping it kind of secret just because I don't want to, spill the beans just yet. But there are going to be some dates. You're going to be running for a special election seat, and you're going to also have to remember to come in and pull papers and run for the regular seat if you so choose. Otherwise, because, if, oops, I forgot to get in there by the date that the date's passed, oh, well, sorry, you're the councilor till inauguration day, and then we're going to be faced with another special election in January because we didn't have anybody run. But I personally would leave it the status quo and not hold an election and not appoint someone. I concur with what Councilor Fucillo said. I think to appoint someone would be a little dangerous if they were going to run, because you're giving someone a leg up, an unfair advantage. I mean, I actually floated the idea to our solicitor and to another attorney I know that said, geez, maybe we have the council appoint someone, but not from Ward 7, which would stop them from someone being able to run. But I was told that it might violate the one man, one vote, and little things in the Constitution. So
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, right. When the Constitution gets in the way, it's such a bugger. But.
Okay. A couple of other questions. If we go with the special pre-limit on 7-1, that, like you said, assumes that there are at least 3 people running for the seat. By the way, for reference, in 2017, I had a preliminary election in Ward 2, and that was the only preliminary election in the entire city. And not many people show up for those things, just in general. Never mind, this will be much less than that. So I think we also have to take into account turnout when it comes to this type of stuff. But if the election happens on the 29th, when would they be sworn in?
Well, the first date that they would be eligible to be sworn in would be after the last day to file recount petition, which would be August 8th. So that would be after August, because people have 10 days to file for a recount should there be multiple people in a race. So after August 8th any time they could be sworn in. They could be sworn in a private ceremony in my office. I know what they did in 2003 was they did it at a council meeting. They actually, when then Councilor Toll was elected in November and he was immediately appointed, they had him come into the well of the council chamber at that meeting. They swore him in, the clerk at the time swore him in at that meeting, and he took his place for the meeting. So anytime after August 8th.
Anytime August
would be the short answer. Yeah.
And our election is going to be still the first week in November, right?
Correct. The regular municipal election will be November 4th, and for those that recall, the council voted pursuant to Chapter 54, 103P. We set the municipal preliminary for September 16th, should that be necessary. Again, those are, we don't know if we're going to need the preliminary election.
Understood. I'm just trying to figure out, like, if we did have an early election, basically, how many council meetings would this guy attend between now and, let's say, if he was sworn in after the November election, immediately, the meeting after. Sorry, Katie, I understand you disagree with that. But.
If you mean if you appoint someone, but you wait till the winner of the November election?
No. If he gets in, if he gets in on, let's say,
you have a special election and he gets
special election, he gets sworn in on. Thank you, 6. Appreciate that, sir. So, if someone was going to come in, basically, if the 3 scenarios are A, early election. Get sworn in early August. B, we run the election and he gets appointed to finish from November to the end of the term. Or C, we wait to the very end and he gets sworn in in January, right? Those are the 3, I see those as 3 scenarios that are options that we can pursue, okay?
Or do nothing.
Do nothing means that it happens in January.
Yes.
That's the do nothing, right? The do something and then do half. The do something would be having someone come in early August, okay? It's just, I think that if someone was going to be running for city council and we run it as a normal election to save money, and he gets appointed to finish Council Lander's term, if people are coming in ready to be a city council, they should be aware this type of stuff is going on. And, you know, sometimes you get into stuff in the middle, and that's just the way things work out, you know? So I would rather see, and I understand Councilor Roby disagrees with this, but having someone go through the normal election and then get appointed after the election, I think of those three options is probably the cleanest, in my humble opinion. And I know there's disagreements here, okay? But, you know, I think that doing it early, it's going to make this election summer confusing to everyone, okay, especially in Ward 7. And the problem is that we will hear about it in all the other wards because it's different. You know, why is 7 different than this? Council Landers died and blah, blah, blah. You know, we're going to have to face it and all that stuff. But I think if we just run through the election and appoint the person afterwards, it's the most effective and efficient way of getting through this. At least that's my view. So,
Thank you,
and I can't
Counselor.
vote, so.
Counselor Navin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will preface this by saying I also do not have a vote on the committee, so you can take my comments or leave them. That is just fine. I appreciate you both being here and for your opinions. Well, Mr. Clerk, your opinion, and Mr. Solicitor, your lack of any sort of opinion whatsoever except keeping us out of hot water. You know, one thing, we've kind of danced around it a little bit. We are here because, in my opinion, I won't put words in anyone else's mouth, but our charter is a little bit broken. And obviously the president filed language at the last meeting to make some changes to that, which we will have for consideration at a future date. So I have some opinions here, but I think we should be cautious to not try to hold to the charter to do what the charter says, because the charter is a little silly in the way that it holds an at-large vacancy separate from a ward vacancy, separate from everybody else. And so making corrections, which we will discuss at some point in the future, I think is a good idea, because it is absolutely ridiculous if you are a ward counselor that your vacancy is filled in a different manner. You know, I appreciate the cost estimate. $5,000 may not seem like a lot, but it's $5,000, and we're in tough budget times, and I've got some concerns about running an election. The special dates that you laid out, if it's the first one, if it's July 29th, then they can be sat for the August meeting, but if it's for August 12th, they can't be sat for the August meeting, because the August meeting's August 18th, and so that 10-day window.
Correct, it would be
right?
August 22nd, so correct.
So, yeah, no, I just, right, so I mean, that's it.
That you are correct, yes. So if you set it for the second date, which is August 12th, yes, August 22nd would be the first date that they would be eligible to be sworn in.
So that counselor, he or she, could be able to miss yet another meeting. So, you know, I do not favor a special election. I do think it's going to be incredibly confusing. We talked about the candidate who may be running for the preliminary will also then have to pull papers immediately after. We didn't talk about the candidate who may not decide to pull for the special, but may decide to pull for November and is out there campaigning at the same time as the special is taking place. And now people are saying, well, what about, you know, Susan, who lives over on, you know, Foley Road, or Foley Road's not in Ward 7, on Susan Road in Ward 7, you know, she's not on the ballot. And I thought she was on the ballot. I'm holding her door card. I don't want to imply that the vacancy is unimportant. I think having been a ward counselor, staring at some of the ward counselors, the work is very challenging, and they are the first people that the residents reach out to. That said, I think that going forward with a special is going to lead to confusion. It's going to lead to cost. There is going to be this much turnout for that election. There is 20%, 25% in a big municipal year.
For a regular municipal
Yeah.
election, we had a huge turnout in the last municipal. I think we had like 23%.
Unbelievable,
And
just
speaking
really
from
strong
experience,
showing.
for someone who has run in a special ward race at one time in my life before getting this wonderful job, it was awful. I'll just say it flat out. It was awful.
And was it?
It was the dead of summer, and
Yeah.
it was awful.
Yeah. I mean,
nobody wanted to see me knocking on their door. I didn't want to knock on doors because it was 1,000 degrees. And the turnout was
Abysmal.
just abysmal. And it was for a longer term than what we're talking about now. It was a year and a half. It was a year and a half. So,
Yeah. I just, in the middle of summer, for an election on July 29th or August 12th, it seems a bit silly. And then I just want to add to the course, I share the concerns about making an appointment at this time. It is challenging. If we had a different setup where perhaps the mayor was appointing someone that we've seen, and someone could have look in the eye conversation and say, I'm not going to run, I will not be a candidate, I think it may be a little bit easier to take somebody at their word. If a city council goes and says, hey, they said they're not going to run, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the clerk tomorrow and pull papers. I do think it causes an unfair advantage, especially with what you're getting for representation in a time period, I don't think is necessarily worth that. But I do share Councillor Doucette's comments. And then point of order, I know Councillor Vital said that both elections, the last two times we did it, but in 2003 when it was done, the home rule was to appoint, and then it was a general election, it was not a special election.
Correct.
And then the appointment was made after the general election.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think that that happened with Mayor Wu last year when she was elected and she was appointed early by the city council. I do think that could make some sense, but also leaving it vacant until January, I would also be in support of either of those options. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nave and Councillor Rossing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to agree with Councillor Doucette and Councillor Nave, and for different reasons. If you look at the charter says for a ward vacancy, if any vacancy occurs before the last 6 months, you hold an election. But it's vacant on what happens after the last 6 months. So there is no rules. We've had a vacancy in the Ward 7 seat since November, almost 6 months. All right? And again, just from, you've all heard it, no one's had, the world hasn't come to an end. We've been able to address any issues that have come up in Ward 7. The issue of a 5-5 vote is real, but that issue of the 5-5 vote could be there if someone decided not to vote on an issue. So that's not, to say just to have a tie-breaking vote, I don't think is a valid issue. So why I would support, I'd call it the Councillor Doucette version of going to let the municipal election run out and then ask for a home rule petition to appoint after the municipal election in November, so that individual could start, whenever the election gets certified. Not just to be there for taxes, but just to start the process. They won the election, we now have the opportunity to appoint. Again, some additional reasons, past precedents in 95 and 2003. Again, in 2003, the council was given the home rule petition was approved, signed by the governor to appoint, and elected not to appoint anyone, and waited until after the municipal election. There was a whole host of reasons how they got to that point, but they didn't decide not to. My version, election timelines have become more onerous, which isn't an excuse not to hold an election, but knowing that you're going to be holding almost parallel elections, and it's in the summer with the folks that aren't, geared to showing up to vote is going to be a challenge. The cost of elections, so the $5,000 for each one, and I'll add in the councilor's salary, so that's $5,000 in councilor's salary as well. No secret, this budget session is going to be a challenge, so anything we can do to help mitigate that, I think is important. And then I'll just offer as councilors, if anybody from Ward 7 has an issue, let us know. I mean, I represent everybody, so it doesn't matter to me if there's what ward they're from. We're happy to adjust it. So, in my opinion, I hope the recommendation is, or the council eventually votes to ask for a special home rule petition to allow the council to appoint the winner of the November election immediately to fill the vacant Ward 7 seat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Ossing. So a lot of my own notes and questions have been brought up, but essentially what Councillor Doucette, Councillor Navin, and Councillor Fucillo had brought up something earlier, and then Councillor Ossing, I feel like, just drove home what I've been feeling, is that having a special election could potentially cause confusion And I'm not going to rehash everything, but I will at this point entertain.
Councilor Brown,
motion.
may I be recognized?
Oh, apologize.
Yeah, I didn't know if you saw me, so thank you. Before you take a vote, I know I'm not on the committee. I've listened to everyone and all your comments. So Councilor Navin brought out a very good point. Budget's going to be tough this year. I think Councilor Ossing just said that too. So with that said, what a dilemma we're in. First and foremost, God rest your soul, Don, because we're talking about a real person that's not with us anymore. So many thanks to all his years of service. We are in a predicament because personally, I believe in the elective process, but as the clerk noted, and I know, Jason, you're kind of keeping it to a limit of what you're going to represent, which I understand, we are in a dilemma because I don't want to ignore the election process, but at the same time be realistic about it. Summertime elections, I don't think, are going to be the greatest. I ran in a special election for state senate once, and it was very low turnout. It was when Bob Duran left to work for the EOEA, Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. With that said, it has been, in my term, we lost Councilor Ledoux, sat, I think, right here, and his wife was appointed. I'd suggest, because of not the cost as much as because of the time of the election process, that we look at an appointment. And that would be my opinion to the committee, since I do not serve on this committee, but I will have a final vote at the meeting. Thank you, Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Counselor. So with that, I will entertain a motion. Counselor Roby?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've sat and listened to all this, and I certainly, I think the consensus up until Councilor Orem walked in the room was that we would not appoint. I can live with no election, no special election. I think the rationale that's been given for why we wouldn't hold one are valid, both the cost, the confusion, the fact that we have not had someone in the seat, not only for now, but actually since back in November when the counselor was not able to attend meetings. So I don't think that there's really that need to fill the seat. I would agree that letting the election in November happen and have that person then be installed immediately, it could work, but I want it to be clear that that would not be considered a special election to fill the seat, because we aren't doing a special election, that we would just have them come in early, although I still am not sure what the point would be. The seat's been empty. It would have been empty for a whole year at that point. Does it matter for 3 more meetings if the seat remained empty, so that the person actually took their seat when everybody else takes their seat in January, when everybody would be sworn in? But I think the sense of the room is that the preference is to have them be installed immediately. So I would move that we ask for a home rule petition to not have a special election, but then to allow the person who wins the November election be installed. Is that sworn in immediately, so that they could then take their seat at the council.
I will second that motion. So on the motion, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, similar to Councilor Roby, obviously I've read the votes in the room, and I do agree. I think this is the proper avenue for us to go. I do just want to say one kind of final remark. I understand the concern that this is going to be a confusing process if we were to move forward with a special election, but I've said this before on the floor, and I firmly believe this. It is our responsibility as folks running for office to educate voters on the election timeline, right? Just as much as it is the city clerk's office. It's our responsibility when door knocking, when going to community events, when doing these things, to educate the community about when an election is happening. And I don't think that changes whether it's a special election or a general election or a primary. I understand that makes it more confusing. But I think to say that a special election is a bad idea because it's going to confuse voters, well, in my opinion, it's our responsibility to tell them, well, this is what's happening. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think it's that kind of legwork that really matters during a time like this. I will support this motion, but I just think that kind of clarification was important. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Councilor Fucillo. So on the motion from Councilor Roby to enact a home rule, to not hold a special election, but then to swear in the candidate who would be elected at our regular November election, to have that candidate sworn in at the next regular meeting. So all those in favor? Opposed? The vote carries 3-0. I'll entertain another motion.
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Thank you. On the motion from Councilor Fucillo to adjourn, all those in favor? Opposed? Meeting is adjourned at 6:15, 3-0.